Good evening. I'm still reporting on the coup. So it's the day after Super Bowl, and all through the House, evil plans are a-stirring, as quiet as a mouse. According to one of the Senate's newest members, J.D. Vance from Ohio, Rhinos in the Senate today worked against Trump's interests to advance the $95 billion Ukraine funding bill. The vote, which didn't occur until 5 a.m. this morning, thanks to an all-nighter GOP filibuster to try to stop it, showed that 22 Republicans joined the Democrats to pass the package by a 70-29 vote. However, this morning in the House, Speaker Mike Johnson announced the package is dead on arrival. According to observers, the Desperado Party will attempt to vote through what's called a discharge petition, which would override Speaker Johnson's ability to stop it. Here's what Senator Vance had to say today on Steve Bannon's War Room.
I want to bring in Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio, who's been one of the leading, not just public intellectuals, but fighters in the trenches. You don't really get that too often. Senator Vance, first off, you've got a piece up in the American Conservative. And I want to take some time and walk through this because this audience must understand this. This piece headline said how the Republican Party in the Senate is working on funding the Ukraine Forever war and to stop the reelection of Donald Trump. Now, I want to take our time and go through this piece because this is the type of kind of intellectual work that we need to frame this debate so people know what's going on. Can you walk us through that, sir?
Yeah, Steve. So first of all, just think about this in two phases, and we'll walk through each. There's the political phase to prevent Donald Trump from being elected president. And then there's sort of an insurance policy phase where even if he is president, this bill contains wording that would effectively make it illegal for him to discharge his campaign promises as president. But let's start with the political dynamic here. Steve, you saw this play out over the last 2 weeks. So McConnell and a few other Republican leaders come out and say, we've got this great piece of bipartisan policy, when in reality, the bipartisan border policy, as we've talked about, was a disaster. So step two is then to say, well, we can't advance this great piece of policy. Why can't we advance this policy? Because of Donald Trump, because of the MAGA Republicans in the House, and because of their allies in the Senate. So you do this two-step where you say that Democrats have done a great job on policy, and then you immediately turn around and say it's Donald Trump's fault that this great policy is not passing. And why are they doing this, Steve? They're doing it to apply as much political pressure as possible to House Republicans to get in line and support this Ukraine funding.
Could it be that the Ukraine mantra is at play here? 10% for the big guy? I mean, a large percentage of the Rhinos joining the Desperados to try to wedge this bill across the finish line are over age 55.
Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt, who was a no vote, tweeting nearly every Republican senator under the age of 55 voted no on this America Last bill. 15 out of 17 elected since 2018 voted no. Things are changing, just not fast enough. Senator Schmitt is in his first term, and he joins us now. And sir, it's good to have you on. I want to start. There's very few things in Washington that you find Washington really cares about. But one thing I notice is when they can't spend a lot of money and when they can't send our money all over the world, they really start going crazy. And I want to know why that is.
Could it be 10% to a group of big guys?
And importantly, the fight is not even close to over. So you're going to have a fight over the government funding deadline, which will involve whether we fund Ukraine in part. You're going to have this talk of a discharge petition, effectively where a few Republicans give control of the House floor to Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the House, to try to pass more Ukraine funding. There's going to be an omnibus package where I'm sure Ukraine funding will be on the docket. And the point is that the establishment's obsession with funding Ukraine will force them to throw Donald Trump under the bus again and again and again. This will be a nonstop rinse and repeat news cycle where every time the Republican Party gets close to standing on principle and beating back $61 billion of Ukraine funding, you will have the Republican establishment singing the praises of Democrats and then attacking our nominee. And of course, as we get deeper and deeper into the spring and summer, Steve, the political cost is going to be greater and greater. You know this as well as anybody, but there will be advertisements run against Donald Trump in swing states that say, look, even some Senate Republicans are saying this was great policy, but Donald Trump killed it. We know voters are really worried about the chaos of the Biden administration, especially on the world stage. They will run advertisements saying we had a solution to the chaos, but then Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans killed it. This is a constant structure within which they can drive down voter turnout on the Republican side and drive up Democratic turnout on their side in an effort to destroy Donald Trump politically. And I think, Steve, you're going to see this news cycle repeat itself. The particulars will be a little bit different, but the news cycle will repeat itself, and the goal is going to be to destroy a potential Trump presidency. Now, that's the political side, and we could go further into that, or we could talk about even if Trump manages to survive this onslaught, I think they've got an insurance plan, because I think that's important to talk about too.
Just explain to people what happened over the weekend, because I think a lot of our audience are shocked when they saw that. They were so excited when this thing was kind of voted down on Friday, I think it was, and then you held one of the votes open for 24 hours, and things started to shift. What is it about Ukraine? You called it a fetish. What is it about Ukraine, particularly when you see super MAGA states, Oklahoma, South Dakota? I mean, this is Trump country. These senators flipping. What happened?
Could it be 10% to a group of big guys?
Well, there are two things going on, Steve. I mean, first of all, to give credit to these guys, even though I disagree with them, some of them really think that this is like the Pearl Harbor moment of their lives. And they've got to stand with Ukraine in the same way that we stood against Nazi Germany and Japan. Of course, the difference is that was our country fighting against Nazi Germany and Japan. And Nazi Germany was much more powerful than Vladimir Putin's Russia. So
I didn't realize until today just how weak Russia is at this point. The war in Ukraine has drained their tank force. This from something called the strategy page, dated today. Russia is running out of tanks. This was not supposed to happen, but the modern anti-tank weapons resulted 2 years later in almost all the T-72 and T-90 tanks being gone, along with most of the T-62s and T-64s brought out of storage. Now, even the 60 to 70-year-old T-54s and T-55s are being restored to be thrown into the battle. This is difficult because spare parts for such ancient tanks have not been manufactured since the 1970s and 1980s. And that, my friends, is why during Tucker Carlson's unprecedented interview with Putin last week, the Russian leader repeated time and time again that Russia would be happy to enter into negotiations to end the war. Trump said he would end this war in one day. Why hasn't Biden taken even a tiny baby step in this direction? Could it be somehow 10% for the big guy is now infecting aging Republican senators as well?
Is the Republican Party, particularly Mitch McConnell, working with the administrative state to set traps for President Trump's second term?
Yes, Steve, and this is maybe the most important point, the thing I want your audience to most take away from what I'm saying here, Steve. In the Ukraine First funding bill, there is funding that is mandatory through 2026. Of course, if Trump wins, as I hope he will, he's going to be president on January of 2025. So what happens if Donald Trump decides to force Ukraine to go to the negotiating table? What if he releases some of the money, but not all of the money? What if he decides to do what a president has to do, which is conduct diplomacy? Steve, you heard it here first. They will impeach him under this legislation that may very well pass tonight out of the United States Senate. I cannot repeat this enough. The Washington Post has already reported that the purpose of the legislation is to control Donald Trump. So what they're trying to do is create a dynamic where if Trump follows his own campaign promises, Steve, they're going to say it's illegal and we have to impeach you. It's maybe reason number one why we've got to kill this legislation. We cannot pass a law now that ties Trump's hands in 2026 and gives Democrats an excuse to impeach him. But that's what way too many Republicans are talking about doing.
I'm still reporting from just outside the citadel of world freedom. Good day.